Hey, welcome to Mad English TV. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you a very interesting and important term, political correctness. Okay, we use this a lot in our culture. All right, so what is political correctness? Well, it's avoiding any words or actions that might offend someone. Okay, so that's good, right? It's bad to offend someone. We want to treat people well and we want to make people feel respected. Okay, so let's look at an example. This guy says, "I like gypsies." And this girl says, "The term gypsy is offensive." Oh, and this guy says, "Oh, sorry. What is the politically correct term for those people?" And she says, "It's Roma." Okay, so the Roma people are a people group that originated in northern India and migrated to Eastern Europe about 1,000 years ago. Okay, they've settled in, most of them are in Romania, but there's also a large population in Italy, Albania, Bulgaria, and a lot of other parts of Europe. Okay, they're called Roma. Now, I'm not sure exactly why the word gypsy is offensive, but somehow it is. And those people get offended, I think, if we call them gypsies, okay? So we should learn the way they like to be called, and that is Roma. Let's take a look at another example. The word Eskimo. Now, when I was a kid, this word was great. I loved Eskimos. I thought they were so cool because they live in igloos. Okay, this kind of snow house is called an igloo. But then when I got older, I found out that this term is a bit offensive for them. Okay, so actually they prefer to be called Inuit, not Eskimo. Okay, so remember, if you come to Canada, these people are the people that live in the northern part of Canada are called Inuit. Now, there's an American football team called the Washington Redskins, and this is their logo. Okay, who's this guy in the middle of their logo? That's a Native American. Okay, now this term here, Redskins, that's a very offensive way to talk about Native Americans. They don't like that. They get offended by it, okay? So if you come to Canada or the US, don't use this term Redskins, okay? Those terms are derogatory or pejorative, okay? These two words mean offensive, okay? So if a term is derogatory, that means it's bad. If it's pejorative, that means it has a really negative or offensive meaning, okay? Now, the problem some people have is that they don't know how to talk about Indigenous people. So Indigenous means first. So Indigenous people means people who were native to that place. They've lived there for maybe thousands of years, okay? So in Canada and the US, there were Indigenous people before the white people came over from Europe, and sadly they killed a lot of the Indigenous people that lived here. So it was a real tragedy. Now, what is the politically correct term to call this people group? Okay, now some people use the word Indians. In Canada and the US, actually I'm not sure about the US, if they're called Native American Indians. I'm not sure if that's offensive, but in Canada, the term Indians or Indian is derogatory. Okay, it's offensive, it's negative, right? They don't like being called that. Also, I think the word Aboriginals is also offensive. I'm not sure though. I think it's better than this one. Aborigines. Now, this word is for the Indigenous people of Australia. Okay, they're called Aborigines. Now, I'm not sure if that is offensive or not. Here in Canada, we don't have this word, so you might have to look it up on the internet. Is this word offensive? Or if you have an Australian friend, you can just ask them. What's the politically correct term to talk about the Indigenous people in your country? Okay, in Canada here, The politically correct term is First Nations. Okay, the First Nations, they were here first. They were the Indigenous people of Canada. So if you come to Canada, remember, this is the correct term, First Nations. Don't use any of these terms. Indians, I think Indians is bad. Especially don't use the term Redskins, okay? That's very bad. Now, if you don't know, you can just ask. It's polite to ask, right? You could say, what is the politically correct term for the Indigenous people of Colombia or Mexico? Okay, I have no idea. That's actually an honest question I have for you. If you're from some country, any country, I want to know, what is the politically correct term for the Indigenous people in your country? Let me know in the comments down there. I would really like to know, because I have no idea what they're called in Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, anywhere. I just know for here in Canada. Okay, so help me out. Now, political correctness doesn't just have to do with racial issues, with skin color, ethnicity, race. It has to do with a lot more than that. It can do with gender issues, sexual orientation. For example, you might have heard the term LGBTQ, okay? That stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, okay? It can also relate to religious things or language. All right, so let's take a look at an example. You know Donald Trump. Everyone knows Donald Trump. So when Donald Trump called for a ban on Muslims entering the United States, okay, this is a good example of something that's not politically correct. Okay, when he said this, everyone was like, no, that's bad. They got really offended. They got really angry. And not only Muslims, he also said that, Mexican, he had some very not politically correct words to describe Mexicans. So Mexicans got offended. Muslims got offended. A lot of different people around the world have gotten offended by Donald Trump, right? So he's an example of someone that's not politically correct at all. Okay, now, political correctness can also sort of have a bad side. It can make people feel afraid to say what they actually think. All right, like my grandma, for example, she doesn't know maybe the politically correct term for a certain people, so she might innocently say the word Indian. She might call the First Nations people Indians. And so sometimes politically correctness can be bad because a person's intentions are good, but they don't know. They're not educated, right? The other aspect of political correctness is that it changes. And this can be it can make people scared because they're not sure what the current term is. Okay, so like for example, in my lifetime, I grew up thinking that the First Nations people were called Indians, and I thought that was fine. But then I learned later that it's not. It changed. It changed to First Nations, okay? This is another example here, LGBTQ. Now, this is a very recent term. A few years ago, it was LGB, okay? And then they added the T a few years later, and then they added the Q. So in the past few years, they've added more letters here. And a friend of mine recently told me that actually this isn't even politically correct anymore. Now there's the letter I at the end here. It's LGBTQI. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not current on these things. So I might sometimes be a little bit afraid to talk about this people group because I don't know maybe the nicest way or the most politically correct way to talk about them. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to offend anybody, right? So it's good to get educated, but sometimes it changes so fast that even if people are educated, they might be sort of behind the times. They might not be current with the latest politically correct term. Okay, so that can be a bad thing. Now I mentioned Donald Trump is not politically correct, but another guy that a lot of people would say is not politically correct either is Mr. Putin, the leader of Russia. Okay? The reason he's not politically correct is because he's made a lot of Muslims angry by saying that Russia will never have Sharia law. Okay? Sharia law is a country's legal system that's based on the Quran. Okay, so countries like Saudi Arabia, they have Sharia law. It's based on the Quran. And Putin said, well, if you want to practice Sharia law, if you want to have Sharia law, you can go to one of those countries like Saudi Arabia, because we're not going to have it here. Okay? So he also has said some things about the LGBTQ community. He doesn't want, or he's put restrictions on LGBTQ education in Russia's education system. So obviously these people are offended, right? So he's offended Muslims, he's offended these people. But you know what? Actually, a lot of people really like him. Most people in Russia really like him, and a lot of people in a lot of other countries really like him too. And in the case of Donald Trump, I think people really like him, and people elected him because he's not politically correct. He just spoke his mind. It's the same with Putin. Putin just, he speaks his mind, and he doesn't try to be overly cautious. Okay, so that's one thing that can be negative about political correctness, is it can make you too afraid to even talk. So that's bad. So like I said, the problem is political correctness can be trying to make everyone happy, but in reality, we can't make everyone happy, right? For example, look at this. So this is called a burqa, okay? A lot of Muslim women wear burqas, and there's a debate in Canada whether burqas should be allowed or not allowed. And it's the same for a lot of European countries. They're debating, should this be allowed or should it not be allowed? So we would call that a hot topic. Okay, it's a topic of debate. It's a hot topic, or a touchy topic, or a sensitive topic. Okay, so I want to know, what is the most touchy topic in your country right now? Let me know in the comments right down there, and I'll see you over in the next episode of Mad English TV. Take care.